Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm Will Robinson Smith. I'll be providing our commentary for the duration of this coverage here for Spaceflight now. It has been a rainy off and on afternoon as we're coming to you live here just about quarter after 5 Eastern time on Florida's Space Coast. Taking a live look right now at a Falcon 9 rocket in the heart of Space Launch Complex 40, Slick 40. SpaceX is hoping to thread the weather needle and be able to launch the Starlink 10-2 mission, sending up a batch of 22 Starlink satellites into low Earth orbit. Those who've been tracking the mission this week, of course, SpaceX was previously looking at a launch opportunity yesterday, but decided to stand down after pushing to the very end of the window before eventually calling the ball game and targeting today. We're kind of squarely in the middle of the launch window for this particular flight. As long as SpaceX has not begun fueling, though, they do have backup opportunities for this mission that last until 8:30 p.m. Eastern. That is 0030 UTC. Again, they can continue to move this mission back as long as fueling has not begun. And as a matter of fact, as we're just now coming on and report that SpaceX has in fact shifted the liftoff time, the new T0 is now officially 8:14 p.m. Eastern. 8:14 is the new time, and we've updated our countdown clock to reflect that. They're currently just shy of 3 hours from liftoff, assuming that the weather clears up enough for them to go ahead with that. Let's take it back to the wide shot here for a moment, fellas. We're looking at the view of Space Launch Complex 40 from the vantage point of the Kennedy Space Center press site. See some clouds that have been hanging around the area. It's been a bit of a mixed bag on the weather front. We're going to take a look at the satellite view of the cloud cover here. You can see things much more precarious for our neighbors to the south. Lots of rainfall down in southern Florida, especially around the Fort Lauderdale, Miami area. So we're not dealing with the unfortunate flooding conditions that our friends in that part of the state are, but you can see the amount of cloud cover that's hanging around the Cape area has been thick in some spots this afternoon, a little bit lighter at other times. However, the lightning risk has been hanging around the Cape throughout the late afternoon coming into the evening, and a phase 2 lightning warning is still in effect. It's that red panel that you were seeing there on the right-hand side, that column, those sort of keying in the middle there. So the potential impacts of a lightning strike to the rocket obviously are chief among the concerns when it comes to many of the weather impacts for a launch, some of the constraints to a liftoff. SpaceX likely looking to avoid much of that potential impact as they're pushing close to the end of their window today. Again, the window lasts until 8:30 p.m. tonight. Current T0 is now 8:14 p.m. Eastern. That is 0014 UTC. Currently at T minus 2 hours, 54 minutes, 39 seconds and counting. For those who are just joining us, it's Will Robinson Smith, reporter for Spaceflight now, and you're joining us in our live launch commentary ahead of the planned liftoff of the Starlink 10-2 mission. Reason there is such a long T0 time between now and the planned liftoff is less than 5 minutes after we joined you with our live launch coverage. SpaceX adjusted the liftoff time. So again, the new T0 liftoff time of this Falcon 9 flight is coming up at 8:14 p.m. Eastern, 0014 UTC for our friends joining around the world. On board this Falcon 9 rocket are 22 Starlink V2 mini satellites heading up to low Earth orbit. This will be the second mission sending the Starlink satellites into the 10th shell for SpaceX. The company also planning a launch into the 9th shell, which is now looking to lift off no earlier than June 18th in the evening from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. Again, that launch coming up next week. The one on tap today, though, you can hear from our microphone outside, though, that tone that was going out is a localized alert to let folks know that a phase 1 lightning warning still in play here at KSC. The phase 2 lightning warning or watch has been allowed to expire. Area still in a phase 1 lightning warning, though. So a lesser impact, but certainly still something they want to keep a close eye on here. Certainly appreciate the folks that are joining with us now live. If you haven't already, be sure to hit the like button to allow some folks to find this live coverage. Even if you decide to maybe put us on mute in the background and come back visually a little bit later, you can just go ahead and leave us up in a tab. We'll be doing some intermittent commentary now that the window just pushed all the way out to 8:14. We'll want to thank some of the folks that are here with us now at the start of our broadcast. Want to in particular begin by thanking our wonderful moderators in the live chat. So thanks to Astro Jen for being with us today, as well as Callistia Lee. Appreciate the both of you. Taking a look now from our friend Chuck Briggs' camera, looking at the Falcon 9 rocket. Keep your eye on the water, though. This is Merritt Island Wildlife Refuge, and you just might see a fin pop out. There's a pod of dolphins that's been swimming in this area. You just might see some of them coming out to play, as they are wont to do. As we roll on with our launch coverage this early evening, I want to note that we are powered by a wonderful channel member community here on YouTube. So thanks to folks like Zeus's Mommy, Butterfly, Jeff Hansen, Stuffa King Crazy, that Martin guy, Wicked Code, that Opal guy. Good to see you got your channel membership back. And Jamie Setchell, aka JJ, many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop.spaceflightnow.com, where you can find things like embroidered mission patches for the recently launched and still in play crew flight test of Boeing's Starliner spacecraft, as well as the upcoming Crew 9 mission aboard a SpaceX Dragon spacecraft. That's set to launch in August. Both patches available online right now, though. Add to your collection. Channel membership also allows you to watch the liftoff of all of our missions from the Cape in 4K, as well as access to member-only videos here on the channel. Sometimes some early peeks at videos before they go out to the general public. In fact, we just put out a video that was recapping the Starliner crew flight test mission up to this point, from liftoff, your spacecraft separation and the journey of Starliner through to docking at the space station, and what the crew has been up to since they've been on orbit. That video is up on the channel right now, and our channel members got a 1 hour sneak peek ahead of that. We'll look at some other opportunities for maybe a little bit larger lead times in the future. Also up on the channel right now, our full conversation with Don Dankert, who is part of the NASA Kennedy Environmental Office, where we talked for about a little over 30 minutes about SpaceX's recent approval by NASA Kennedy to expand the Roberts Road site, where the Hangar X building is, planning on a 100-acre expansion. We also talked about the public meetings that are happening this week. In fact, there's one starting in just about 35 minutes up at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex. That's happening tonight from 6 to 8. And the virtual meeting coming up next week, talking about Starship launch operations at Launch Complex 39A. Again, you can find that full interview up on the channel right now for members only. You can also read some excerpts from that conversation. It's part of an article up on our website right now, spaceflightnow.com. Speaking of channel members, want to thank a few folks for joining us with channel membership tonight. Our thanks to Psychonaut69 for upgrading their membership to the mission specialist level. Really appreciate that, Psychonaut. Roddy Mom 00 joining us at the pad leader level. Welcome aboard, Roddy Mom. Glad to have you with us. Also, welcome to Julie Young, also joining us at the pad leader level. And a big thank you to pre-existing channel members Mark Otto and Clistia Lee for each gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships, getting us off on a good footing with a bit of generosity. So to our newest gifted channel members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. Be sure to thank Calistia and Mark in the live chat if you haven't already. Last but not least, if you have a comment or question, would like to be a part of our show, and your comment or question is appropriate to be read on the show, you can also use the YouTube Super Chat feature. And not only will you be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now, but you'll also give us some interesting things to talk about as we continue on with this launch countdown. So thanks to folks like Parker Rutherford for a $1 Super Chat. Thank you, Parker. Bill Sugden for a £10 Super Chat. Really appreciate that, Bill. Giving a contribution to the Coffee and Cookie Fund. And Parker Rutherford again with a $4 Super Chat. Looks like, based on the emoji, also chipping into the Coffee Fund, although I'll maybe put that to some loose leaf tea. Stevens, our editor of Spaceflight Now, is more the coffee drinker, as I think Adam is as well. Speaking of the fellows behind the cameras and the technology, our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, of course, running the technical operations of the broadcast this evening. Adam Bernstein doing some launch photography for us, as well as running the tracking camera tonight. If you're not already following Adam on X, you can find him by simply looking up his handle there, ABurnNYC. Our other photographer, Michael Kane, also on X at MD Kane Jr. Michael's got the evening off, feeling a little under the weather, so be sure to wish him well in the live chat, and he'll be back right as rain before you know it. While you're on X, be sure to follow Spaceflight Now, simply at Spaceflight Now, if you're not already. And if you're not on X, you can find our work over on Facebook and Threads as well. Currently T-minus 2 hours, 44 minutes, 39 seconds and counting. Since we've got a little bit longer of a lead time here, we're going to be shifting into some lighter commentary over the next couple of hours, then picking up with our more regularly scheduled commentary a little bit closer once we hit the 1 hour mark. But for those who are with us now, let's go ahead and take the opportunity to talk about the trajectory of today's mission, let you know where it's going to fly. Again, this is the Starlink 10-2 mission, 22 Starlink satellites on board. So flying a little bit different trajectory than what we got used to with the sixth shell. So certainly worth revisiting with a little bit more frequency as we get into the shell in earnest. After liftoff from Space Launch Complex 40, otherwise known as Slick 40, Falcon 9 is going to be flying in a northeasterly trajectory. So with the launch shifting to an 8:14 liftoff, assuming that all continues to go well and the weather improves. For our neighbors to the north, I'm talking North Florida, Georgia, Carolinas, be sure to keep an eye out for the Falcon 9 and let us know if you're able to catch a glimpse of this bird as it flies past your neck of the woods. Also, if you haven't already, go ahead and hop in the live chat. Let us know where you're watching from. It's always good to see from what part of the world folks are joining in with our live launch coverage. Following stage separation, the first stage booster is going to land on one of the SpaceX drone ships. And as you can see on the screen, they're targeting today. Just read the instructions. A little bit further beyond the map here on the screen, payload fairings will also be jettisoned and scooped up, brought aboard one of the recovery vessels. SpaceX has a couple of recovery vessels here on the East Coast, Bob and Doug. Of course, named after the duo who flew the Demo 2 mission, the first human spaceflight endeavor for SpaceX back in May of 2020. In fact, their spacecraft Crew Dragon Endeavour currently docked to the International Space Station as we speak alongside Boeing's Starliner spacecraft. A little bit later on in the broadcast, we'll go ahead and show you a really nifty picture. If you haven't seen it already, it was captured by another company called Maxar from their Worldview 3 satellite. A really fantastic image. We'll bring that up for you a little bit closer to liftoff today. Again, we're going to go ahead and lean back into a little bit lighter commentary here over the next couple of hours. We'll be popping in with you periodically for updates and to check in with you. Go ahead and leave this tab open. We'll be keeping you updated as we get updates on this particular Falcon flight. Again, you're watching live launch commentary here for Spaceflight now of the Starlink 10-2 mission. Currently T minus 2 hours, 31 minutes, 31 seconds and counting. Weather has been the story of the day when it comes to the Starlink 10-2 mission. Number of thunderstorms have been rolling through the area of Florida's Space Coast. Certainly quite rainy down in the southern Florida area, closer to Fort Lauderdale, Miami area. Although we're just talking about on the back channels here that the west coast of Florida also getting a decent bit of rain at the moment as well. Taking a look back at the satellite view here. Bit of good news though, the phase 1 lightning warning has been lifted. So the immediate proximate threat of lightning has somewhat diminished. Certainly good news. It's here in the wide shot of our vantage point of the Falcon 9 rocket from the press site, though. Still a not insignificant amount of cloud cover hanging around the Cape this evening. Probably something that SpaceX and the launch team will be keeping a close eye on. Coming into the launch opportunity today, the 45th Weather Squadron forecast just a 25% chance of favorable weather during the launch window. Some of their concerns were annual clouds, cumulus clouds, and violating the surface electric fields rule. One of the concerns when it comes to launching a rocket, especially when there's a lot of cloud activity in the vicinity of the pad and along its flight path, is that the rocket can essentially create its own electricity and potentially charge up the clouds enough to create a lightning strike, which would be dangerous for the rocket, the payload, and those in the immediate area, of course. If SpaceX decides, as they did yesterday, to stand down from their launch opportunity today, looking at the 24-hour backup opportunity tomorrow, which opens up at 4:35 tomorrow afternoon. The weather starts at 40% favorable at the beginning of the window and then improves to 80% favorable by the end. And the surface electric fields rule also falls away as a watch item. As is the case, though, with all of the launch activities here or fueling operations that are prepared for, Brevard County Emergency Operations Center has activated in support of this mission. They are one of the busiest EOCs in the country because of that reason, because they activate every time a launch provider goes into the fueling of one of their vehicles or is preparing to do so. Again, we are in a period of slightly lighter commentary at this point since we still have quite a bit of time before the liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket, or the planned liftoff, I should say, if the weather does in fact cooperate. We'll be popping in again periodically as we continue on through the count, let you know any updates, give you some pertinent information about the Starlink 10-2 mission. We appreciate you being with us. You're watching live launch commentary of the latest Falcon flight from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, brought to you by Spaceflight Now. We're now currently T-minus 2 hours, 8 minutes, 13 seconds and counting away from the launch of the Starlink 10-2 mission. Will Robinson Smith, reporter for Spaceflight. Now you're taking a live look at Space Launch Complex 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. These looks like someone paddle boating in the middle of the Banana River here. Of course, launch complex situated amidst the Merritt Islands Wildlife Refuge, a home of some recreational activity as well as a whole host of flora and fauna. I've seen some dolphins leaping about the waters as we've been tracking the progress of this Falcon 9 rocket, trying to lift off amid some not terribly ideal weather that we've been seeing throughout the late afternoon coming into the evening here. Taking a look from our wide camera that photographer Adam Bernstein is now set up looking back to the northwest part of the state. See the sun starting to make its way down for the day as we look at NASA's iconic vehicle assembly building, the VAB. See more of the cloud picture in this shot. Lots of break for blue, but interwoven by a lot of cloud cover still hanging around the area. If you weren't with us when we talked about a little bit earlier, the 45th Weather Squadron only forecast a 25% chance of favorable weather conditions for a liftoff this evening. SpaceX already punting to close to the end of the launch window today. The current launch window only runs until 8:30 tonight, so as long as SpaceX has not started fueling, they do have the opportunity to shuffle one more time at least to the very end of the window if they feel it is necessary. Taking a look at the satellite view of the clouds here. Of course, SpaceX not only tracking the weather at liftoff, but also likely in the recovery zone where the drone ship just read the instructions is positioned waiting to catch the Falcon 9 first stage booster, tail number 1073 in the SpaceX fleet. Launching for a 16th time today, and we'll talk more about its flight history as we get a little bit closer to liftoff this afternoon, early evening. Also worth noting that these days, or before I get to that thought, looking here, a note that both the Phase 1 Lightning Watch has now also been allowed to expire in addition to the Phase 2 Lightning Warning. So lightning not as much of an impact here at the launch site. As we were just talking about the area for the booster recovery may be the watch item here. Obviously, it's important for SpaceX to recover their first stage boosters, fly them as often as they can. They're working on certifying for up to 40 flights with both the first stage booster as well as the payload fairing on their Falcon 9 rocket. Taking a look back now at the satellite view of the cloud area. Meteorologists with the National Hurricane Center are tracking what is being termed now as tropical disturbance number 1. So below a tropical depression, certainly below a tropical storm, and far below a hurricane, but our first bit of really concerted tropical activity as we are unfortunately in the midst of hurricane season here. in the Atlantic Ocean, obviously extending the watch area to the Gulf of Mexico. But you can see here from this graphic provided by the National Hurricane Center based in Miami, Florida, which is being hammered by the rain caused by this tropical disturbance. Currently, the only bit of prominence here at this current time, if you look out further in the Atlantic Ocean, looks like there's nothing that's quite together enough to register on this scale just yet. So keeping a close eye on that. But as you see where the X is, that's right near the area of the recovery zone for the first stage booster. So while the weather may be improving here, and it certainly appears to be, if things are still dicey where the booster needs to land, that could also cause SpaceX to stand down from a launch opportunity today. Not saying that they have, not saying that they will, but saying that they could. It is definitely going to be a watch item for the company as they continue on with the countdown today and looking to see if they are able to launch coming up T minus 2 hours, 1 minute, 49 seconds from now. As is the case at basically all times covering the space beat, there's never just one thing happening. Naturally, there's a whole host of things depending on which corner of the space ecosystem you're looking at. If you're interested in human space flight, of course, there was supposed to be a spacewalk happening over the course of today. EVA number 90 set to take place starting at about 8 o'clock this morning, featuring NASA astronauts Tracy Dyson and Matthew Dominic. Dyson would have been making her fourth spacewalk, Matt Dominic making his first. However, there's a suit discomfort issue, quote unquote. They decided to move away from the EVA opportunity today. From our understanding, it sounds like they're looking at potentially the 24th for that first EVA, and then the second EVA in a series of 3 that they're trying to get through would come up on July 2nd. We're waiting for further information on the potential impacts to the timeline for the undocking of Boeing's Starliner spacecraft and its return for a land landing somewhere in the southwest United States. Obviously, all the events on the space station play together and have knock-on effects for each other when it comes to scheduling these events. So I'll be sure to let you know the very latest when it comes to the Starliner undocking and the return of NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore, Sonny Williams, the conclusion of the CFT mission, currently still in progress. That's the notable item of the day on the human spaceflight venture. We want to talk about national security space missions. Well, there's a notable bit of news on that coming down today. Per a notice from the Department of Defense, we do have now our 3 launch companies that have been selected for the 3rd phase of the national security space launch contracts, together worth a combined cumulative potential of hitting $5.6 billion, with a 5-year ordering period extending through June 2029. From the Phase 2 contract, we have the 2 returning companies, unsurprisingly, SpaceX and United Launch Alliance. ULA using their Vulcan rocket, SpaceX making their Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets available for this contract award. But the new entrant and the notable newsmaker here is Blue Origin, and its New Glenn rocket now entering into the national security competition in lane one. So essentially, the national security space launch contracts for phase three extend to more, potentially more companies than the previous two phases. Phase one, it was basically ULA's show. Phase two, SpaceX really came into prominence here with a contract split of 60-40, with United Launch Alliance getting 60% of the missions awarded, SpaceX getting 40%. For phase three, they decided to split the missions up into, they call two lanes. Lane one will again see a similar split, generally speaking, a 60%, generally speaking, a 40%. But then within that, there are, I believe, 7 missions that will be awarded within phase one that allowed for a company that can prove or give notable credence to their ability to fly out those missions. And they'll be awarded as a part of the lane one task orders. And so Blue Origin now falls into that spot, and we'll get some of the, as you can tell by the top line award number of $5.6 billion, quite lucrative launch contracts coming from the Department of Defense. The U.S. Space Systems Command, assured access to space, will be the one, or the part of the U.S. Space Force that will be responsible for assigning those particular missions, based at the Los Angeles Air Force Base in El Segundo, California. They're responsible for, again, assigning the missions under the phase three, lane one launch services procurement. Lane two is a little bit more broad and open. Instead of being able to have to prove yourself and make your case at the beginning of the contract, or basically everything for this 5-year task order, like with lane one, lane two is a year-to-year base award. And so a launch company that's a little bit smaller, maybe a little bit newer to the game, and maybe is not able to fly all the various different types of missions that could come up for either the U.S. Space Force or the National Reconnaissance Office. This gives a little bit more latitude to some of the companies that don't necessarily need to, want to, or able to do it all, but they are able to fly more specified missions, more singular missions, and that's where the phase three, lane two contracts come into play. They'll be awarded annually, and so expect to see more and varied names once those awards start coming out. And that's an area where we might see more names like Rocket Lab, like Firefly. Perhaps ABL further down the road. For those just joining us, I do want to welcome the now more than 1,900 of you that are with us this evening. Currently watching our live launch coverage of the Starlink 10-2 mission, Falcon 9 rocket, hoping to launch from Space Launch Complex 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station sending up an additional 22 Starlink satellites into low Earth orbit. Once this mission goes, this will be the 44th dedicated Starlink launch of the year so far, and the 107th time that SpaceX has launched batch of the Starlink V2 mini satellites. SpaceX currently targeting a T0 liftoff of 8:14 p.m. Eastern, 0014 UTC. As long as they have not started fueling, though, they are able to push back in their T0, the window extending out to 8:30 tonight. We are currently T-minus 1 hour, 25 minutes, 45 seconds and counting as it currently stands for SpaceX in their attempt to launch the Starlink 8-14 mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Weather has proved, I will say, challenging today for a launch opportunity. Coming into today, the 45th Weather Squadron only forecast a 25% chance of favorable weather conditions, tracking lightning risk as well as cumulus clouds, but also the anvil clouds as a possible constraint to launch. Taking a look to the north and the west from our wide camera view, looking back at NASA's vehicle assembly building, you can see some of those thicker clouds, unfortunately, making their way toward the pad, not away from the pad. Also keeping an eye on conditions out in the booster recovery area. Showed you that graphic from the National Hurricane Center, where tropical disturbance number 1 is sitting out there right about in the area where the booster would need to be recovered. So, of course, SpaceX is going to be keeping an eye on both the launch weather here near the pad as well as booster recovery a little bit further down the stretch. It needs both of those to be in a good enough spot that it feels like it can launch. Continue to step on through the count. Of course, SpaceX still has a little bit of wiggle room if they decide to push back the liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket. They have about 15 minutes beyond their current T0. Right now, targeting 8:14 p.m. Eastern for a liftoff, 0014 UTC. They have until 8:30 left in this window. Regarding another item that I was talking about a little bit earlier, the award of the National Security Space Launcher NSSL Phase 3 Lane 1 missions. Do have a little more context to provide you with, but before I do that, just want to make a quick correction to something I said. As I described the breakdowns of Lane 1 versus Lane 2, mixed up Lane 1 and Lane 2. Lane 1 is the NSSL Phase 3 lane that's a little bit more geared towards new commercial launch providers and newer rocket company entrants that aren't quite as proven out as a ULA or a SpaceX. Phase 3 lane 2 are where the more resilient and proven out launch operators are going to be competing for that part of the contract. And phase 3 lane 2 is expected to be awarded later this year. The phase 3 lane 1 awards will be doled out on a 5-year basis according to the U.S. Space Systems Command. Assured access to space, which is based in El Segundo, California. 5-year ordering period stretches from fiscal year 25 through fiscal year 29. And according to the SSC, are expecting, quote, at least 30 NSSL Lane 1 missions are expected to be completed over the 5-year base ordering period. So a number of opportunities for a lot of different companies to potentially get a bite at the apple and provide opportunities for some newer folks like a Via Space, an ABL, Firefly, potentially come into the marketplace in this arena. With the announcement of the contract award today, though, again, I will quote the U.S. Space Systems Command here, and they say, quote, "New provider Blue Origin will receive $5 million to conduct an initial capabilities assessment and understand how the launch provider will approach tiered mission assurance. SpaceX and ULA will receive $1.5 million each since they are incumbent Phase 2 providers. And Space Systems Command already understands their launch systems and approaches to mission assurance." So again, to take that out of press conference lingo, essentially SpaceX and ULA have been around the block before with the Phase 2 and for ULA Phase 1 national security space launch mission contract missions. And so SSC doesn't need nearly as much information for them to be able to prove out their capabilities. They're very aware of what ULA and SpaceX are able to do. Blue Origin, of course, is the newer kid in town as far as on an orbital launch front. The New Glenn has yet to complete its first mission, looking for a launch this fall. A couple of Mars orbiters from NASA currently being built and tested out by Rocket Lab. And so the $5 million award to Blue Origin at this time will help SSC and Blue Origin be able to further prove out and understand the capabilities and the ability of the New Glenn rocket to be able to achieve the missions that will be awarded during this first year of procurement. SSC did not name any particular missions that will be awarded for the fiscal year 25 batch of flights. An announcement likely to come down a little bit further in the future. Meanwhile, speaking of SpaceX missions, the Starlink 10-2 mission is what we're currently tracking here amid some less than ideal weather. Take a look at our wide camera here. You see lots of clouds hanging around. This particular camera is pointed east, looking at pad 40, Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Looking to the west, where the weather is coming from, you can see there's quite a bit of cloud blankets headed toward pad there. So not what you'd ideally like to see if you're hoping for a launch tonight, where SpaceX has not at this time announced that they're standing down from a launch. So we will continue to hang with you, keep you updated on any further developments. Right now we are T-minus 1 hour, 17 minutes, 27 seconds and counting away from the launch of this particular Starlink flight. As we continue to track the progress of this rocket, certainly want to thank the more than 2,100 of you that are with us live this evening. Hope you all have had a good and productive work week, or if you're a student, a good school week or time at university. Appreciate you stopping by with us tonight. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button. It allows more folks to find their way into this live coverage. And let us know where you're watching from this evening. I always love to see where folks are popping in from around the world. Let's take a look at the various weather input sources that we're tracking here. We're bringing the latest information on the outlook here. Good news is we have all green across both the lightning watch for phase 1 and lightning warning in phase 2. Lightning not a current big watch item here. Certainly not a safety issue for our photographers that are out and about. Seeing a little bit of venting here from the strong back. Just as a point of note, this is not the so-called big vent that we'll see as we continue on and really get into the fueling part of the countdown. A little pre-venting we see about 2 hours out, and then a little more than an hour out as well sometimes. Take a look at the live chat. Want to thank one of our channel members here, Artemis. Good to see you again this evening, gifting 50 Spaceflight Now memberships. My goodness, Artemis, we really appreciate that level of generosity. Thank you so much for growing our member family here. And to our 50 newest channel members, welcome aboard. We're very glad to have you with us. And if you haven't already, be sure to thank Artemis in the live chat. We hope you stick around with channel membership. Scroll in the chat. Want to give a shout to Astro Joe. I see you've entered the chat this evening as well. Hope you're doing all right. And welcome this evening to Stephanie B, who's joining us from the other side of the world down there in Melbourne, Australia. I believe it's about, what, 9 a.m., Stephanie? Thereabouts? As we're continuing to track this Falcon 9 launch, you may have noticed it's been a minute since we've seen a launch from SpaceX's other pad here in Florida. Talk about Launch Complex 39A. Right now, teams, maybe not right this second, but broadly speaking, right now, SpaceX has been working to turn this pad over from a Falcon 9 configuration to a Falcon Heavy configuration, as the first Falcon Heavy of the year, preparing to launch at the end of this month, sending up the NASA and NOAA weather satellite called GOES-U, the fourth and final in the GOES-R series of geostationary satellites. The last of the series before they shift over into the next generation GeoXO satellites. Liftoff from Pad 39A from that Falcon Heavy is expected no earlier than June 25th. So not too far away. Bit of a light year for Falcon Heavies as compared to last year, where we had 5 launch. This year, we're only anticipating 2 lifting off from 39A. GOES-U this month, and then in October, launching an important planetary mission that is currently being worked here at KSC, NASA's Europa Clipper spacecraft, which again is preparing for a launch, that window opening up on October 10th. Currently T minus 1 hour, 9 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. Taking a look at the live chat, checking to see where some folks are popping in from this evening. See South Georgia, Southern California, Titusville, Florida. Number of folks from California this evening. Newark, Ohio. Huh. Didn't realize there was also a Newark, Texas, and a Newark, Ohio. Nifty. Learn something new every day. One of our channel members, Louis Bory, joining us from Miami. Louis, I hope you and your folks down there are doing okay, given all the rain and the flooding. Certainly sending a kind thought to all of our friends and viewers that are checking in from South Florida. You've got someone down there, just drop them a line, make sure they're doing okay. Lots of rain and notable flooding between the Fort Lauderdale and Miami areas, especially. See the cloud cover starting to really pick up here. The reverse shot from what we showed you before from the VAB. Those thicker clouds continuing to march their way out towards pad 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Here now, once again, less than an hour to the planned T0 liftoff time of the SpaceX mission Starlink 10-2, set to lift off from Space Launch Complex 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. For just joining us with our live coverage, I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter here at Spaceflight now. So good to have you with us, to the 2,300 of you that are hopping in tonight. As you can see from our wide shot here, though, it is a very cloudy day as weather continues to be a watch item here on Florida's Space Coast. It has been stormy in the afternoon and evenings throughout the week so far, as what has now become tropical disturbance number 1 has been cruising through, really impacting us to the central and southern parts of Florida. Not quite as much in the northern part of the state. We're still seeing the knock-on effects of this tropical system that is making its way through the Sunshine State, making it a little less sunshiny at the moment. You see those thick clouds hanging over us right now. But at this moment in time, SpaceX continues to target 814 as the T0 liftoff of its Falcon 9 rocket, sending up another 22 Starlink satellites into low Earth orbit. That's the plan, at least. Currently T-minus 57 minutes, 46 seconds and counting. As we are tracking the progress of this Starlink flight, another star-named mission also happening as we speak. Boeing Starliner currently still docked to the International Space Station, wrapping up flight day number 8 in the mission, having launched from Pad 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station back on June 5th, docking with the ISS on the 6th. As Boeing noted in its wrap-up statement for the day, Butch Wilmore, Sonny Williams helped support the crew members of Expedition 71 on the ISS. Today, they assisted with the planned spacewalk of NASA astronauts Tracy Dyson, Matt Dominic, helped them suit up for heading out of the Quest airlock. However, they didn't make it out of the airlock today. They decided to stand down from EVA number 90 because of a suit discomfort issue. Originally, the undocking of Starliner was targeting no earlier than June 14th. That was pushed out to June 18th to create a little bit more space between EVA 90 and the undock and landing of Starliner. With the shuffling of the EVA, though, off of today, looking at, according to communications between the ground and flight engineer and Crew 8 mission pilot Mike Barrett, sounds like they are targeting June 24th for EVA 90, and July 2nd for EVA 91. So what that means exactly for the timing of Starliner undock and return, that is still TBD. We're waiting for further information from NASA and Boeing on that front. We were also busy today taking an inventory of some of the food, water, and hygiene products that they've used up to this point. Quoting from Boeing here, quote, they also worked with flight controllers to update a USB drive that is often refreshed with new information for return scenarios like weather conditions that could be downloaded to their tablets and used for an unlikely situation where crew would need to quickly leave the ISS. Of course, this is the crew test flight, crew flight test, CFT. So they're going through a number of scenarios, testing out a number of things with the Starliner spacecraft that future crews won't need to necessarily go through, but they want to make sure they have a good baseline of operations for both crew procedures as well as an understanding of how humans interact with the Starliner spacecraft before they go ahead with a full crew rotation mission, Starliner 1, set for no earlier than spring of 2025, assuming that certification goes well later this fall. If it's determined that Starliner needs more time before it enters full service with ISS full crew rotation missions, then NASA and its international partners on the ISS will go ahead and move forward with the SpaceX Crew 10 mission in the spring, as opposed to Starliner 1. Back here on the ground with Starlink 10-2. You're T-minus 52 minutes, 38 seconds and counting as SpaceX still holding on to that 8:14 departure time outlook. Although the cloud ceiling continues to shuffle ever closer to the pad. So from a very much not meteorologist standpoint, doesn't look the most ideal for a liftoff. But until they scrub the mission, if that is in fact what they decide to do tonight, which again, not saying that they are, just saying that they could. If in fact they do decide to push to the 24-hour turnaround opportunity, the launch window tomorrow opens up on Friday, June 14th at 4:35 p.m. Eastern. Standing by as always for launch photography as well as to track the Falcon 9 rocket when it is ready for liftoff. Sorry, Adam Bernstein, in the center of this frame here. You can find him on X with all of his great launch photography at ABurnNYC. Michael Caine has the evening off. Pardon the pun, feeling a little under the weather, but he'll be back up and at him before you know it. You can find his work at MD Caine Jr. While you're on X, be sure to follow us at Spaceflight now. We're also on Facebook and Threads. To continue on, let's go ahead and take a look at the countdown timeline for the Falcon 9 rocket, let you know the milestones that are coming up ahead as we continue to step on through the countdown tonight. T-minus 38 minutes, so just about 12 minutes from now, as the point at which the SpaceX launch director will need to take that poll, the start of propellant load, assuming they are in a good position to do so. If that go-ahead is given, that'll be followed up 3 minutes later by a couple different events. T-minus 35 minutes, they'll start loading RP1 or rocket-grade kerosene on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages. At the same time, liquid oxygen will be loaded on board the Falcon 9's first stage. T-minus 16 minutes, the second stage LOX load process will begin. Before that, though, we'll see the so-called big vent. Happens as the feed lines are being chilled. Strong back. That comes about T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds. T-minus 7 minutes, the Falcon 9's engine chill down sequence begins. It involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, and it protects them from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes out, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, strong back retract sequence begins. Starts with the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings opening up, and then the transporter erector, the strong back, will recline back about 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. Stays in that position until liftoff, at which point it pulls back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. About 3 minutes out, the first stage liquid oxygen tank should be full. 2 minutes prior to liftoff, the second stage LOX tank fueling concludes. At that point, the Falcon 9 is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will give their go for launch at 45 seconds out. The engine ignition command will be issued at T-minus 3 seconds. And if all 9 Merlin 1D engines ignite and are healthy, the command will be given for hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 for a T0 liftoff. Coming up again at 8:14 p.m. Eastern, 0014 UTC, or in other words, T-minus 48 minutes, 14 seconds. Now T minus 42 minutes, 11 seconds and counting. Just about 4 minutes away from the point at which the SpaceX launch director is going to need to make the call on the startup prop load tonight, if they are in fact in a good position to launch this Falcon 9 rocket. Assuming that go ahead is given, then fueling will start the T minus 35-minute mark. Currently T minus 41 minutes, 17 seconds and counting. Of course, SpaceX ever busy, not just here on the forthcoming launch of their Falcon 9 rocket, but also looking towards the future of its Starship program. Taking a look down at Starbase, our friends over at Lab Padre, appreciate them this vantage point. A little hard to distinguish from this distance, but SpaceX at this point in time has begun construction on the second Starship launch tower, previously mentioned by both the company and Elon Musk directly. They plan to have two towers, both here in southern Texas as well as back here in Florida. In fact, as we speak, the FAA is closing in on the last 25 minutes of a public information session over at the KSC Visitor Complex. They're the lead federal agency, but other supporting federal agencies are there as well, as they are going through an environmental impact statement assessment of launching Starship rocket from Launch Complex 39A in the future. SpaceX looking to launch about 44 missions per year from the tower that's there at LC-39A. That would be in addition to continuing operations with the Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets at that pad. At the same time, the Department of the Air Force is also looking at potentially allowing for Starship operations to happen at Space Launch Complex 37, the now former home of ULA's Delta IV Heavy rocket. That is the preferred option that SpaceX has put forward. They're also looking at Slick 50, which is an undeveloped pad over on the Cape side of things. So lots of activity happening with the Starship program right now. Important not only for SpaceX's future ambitions with its launch capabilities, but also a big piece of the Artemis architecture, as Starship will be the human landing system. Piece of the Artemis program that'll actually bring astronauts down to the lunar surface on the Artemis 3 4 missions. Now T minus 38 minutes, 22 seconds and counting. Coming up on the point in which SpaceX has to make a decision on the start of prop load, if they're feeling good about where they are now, where they will be in 38 minutes and some change. And if the weather will cooperate for the liftoff and booster landing. If successful with this mission, whenever it's ready to launch, either today or tomorrow or in the future, this will mark SpaceX's 250th drone ship landing to date. Skies continuing to look cloudy. And as I'm speaking these words, we do have confirmation now that SpaceX is targeting the end of the window. 8:30 p.m. Eastern is now the newest, latest, and end of the window for SpaceX. We are adjusting our T0 clocks. Stand by. So as things currently stand now, SpaceX is looking for a T0 liftoff of its Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 10-2 mission now at 10:52, or excuse me, at T minus 52 minutes and 34 seconds and counting for a liftoff at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 0030 UTC. Again, if things continue to trend as they have and the weather doesn't improve for a launch tonight, the launch window tomorrow opens up at 4:35 p.m. Eastern. That said, do want to be super clear that while the weather does not look the most optimal for liftoff tonight, SpaceX has not definitively said that weather has been the sticking point with this. So just want to make that clear that there possibly could be technical reasons why they're shuffling back in the countdown window or the launch window tonight, or it could be the weather, or perhaps a third option. Again, SpaceX has not stated the reason for their push back in the launch window tonight. We'll stand by for further word from them. But as it currently stands, they're targeting an 8:30 liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket, tail end of tonight's window. And as we're watching the progress of the Falcon 9 at Pad 40, you're taking a live look now at a booster being transported from Port Canaveral through Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. We'll keep an eye out for this we'll likely as we'll likely see it pass by the vehicle assembly building in the not too distant future. So we'll be watching out for that. As we continue to track the Starlink 10-2 mission, we are now T minus 45 minutes, 50 seconds and counting. A little less than 8 minutes away from the point at which the SpaceX launch structure will once again reach the point of the pole ahead of the start of propellant load if SpaceX feels like they're in a good position to do so. Again, SpaceX has not made any public comment on the reason they are pushing to the end of the window today, whether it is a technical item, whether it is weather, whether it is some combination of the two. We'll continue to keep an eye out for any potential statement from them. But as we are tracking that, I want to thank channel member Artemis for gifting another 20 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that generosity, Artemis. And to our newest 20 channel members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Artemis in the live chat. And we hope you stick around with us. Also want to thank another one of our channel members, Charles Boyer, with a $5 super chat, saying Scrubby needs to stay home tonight. And well, again, they have not called a scrub as of yet. They're still targeting the end of the window as of right now. We're now at T minus 38 minutes, 22 seconds and counting. We do finally have a statement from SpaceX. They say, and I quote, all systems are looking good. Weather is 40% favorable, and propellant load is about to begin for tonight's launch of 22 Starlink satellites from Florida. So even though the chance of favorable weather at liftoff is less than a coin toss in SpaceX's odds, they are going to at least make a run for it, or run at it, I should say. Now at T minus 37 minutes, 42 seconds and counting. Fueling now, apparently, set to begin in less than 3 minutes at the T minus 35-minute mark. Again, for those who were not with us when we were talking about a little bit earlier, that process begins with the loading of RP1 or rocket grade kerosene on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages, as well as liquid oxygen being loaded on the Falcon 9's first stage. Second stage LOX load begins at the T minus 16-minute mark. And our thanks to the more than 4,200 of you who are watching with us live. Really appreciate you being with us on this Thursday evening. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button. It's a quick, easy, and free way to help support the channel, and it allows the YouTube algorithm to do its thing, since the engagement allow more folks to find this live launch coverage as we continue to step on in through the rest of the count. Taking a look at the satellite view of the clouds in the area paints part of the weather picture of the day. Seen a number of storms cruising through central Florida, as well as our neighbors and friends to the south. Conditions not the most ideal in the booster recovery area as well, but SpaceX, as they mentioned in their post on X, say that whether 40% favorable, which I guess is good enough to at least see if they can find a reasonable enough window of opportunity when they hit 8:30, coming up 35 minutes and 7 seconds. You can see the cloud cover hanging around the area of the pad right now. Taking a look in the direction of northwest, looking at the vehicle assembly building across from the press site here. Still quite a bit of cloud cover in the area, some blue sky beyond that. So the timing of everything works out. We'll see the liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket in just a little under 35 minutes. At this point, the fueling process has begun for SpaceX on this Falcon flight. Running back through the countdown timeline for those who may not have been with us, just to re-review this very briefly. Those two fueling milestones have begun, so that's why they're already up on the screen for you. Coming up next will be second stage LOX load at T minus 16 minutes. For that, though, we'll see the so-called big vent from the strong back. It's a good sign that fueling is occurring on time and on schedule. Comes up at T minus 20 minutes, 20 seconds. It'll be followed by the chill down of the 9 Merlin 1D engines at T minus 7 minutes. SpaceX will send some liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps and help protect them from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 months before liftoff, the first stage kerosene tank is done filling. T-minus 4.5 minutes, the strong back retract sequence begins. Starts with the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings opening up. Then the transporter erector or the strong back will recline 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. It stays in that position until liftoff, which point it clears the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9 by pulling back in a much more rapid fashion. About 3 minutes out, the first stage liquid oxygen tank should be full. T-minus 2 minutes, the second stage LOX tank finishes filling, at which point the Falcon 9 is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. Coming into the final 60 seconds, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. Go for launch is given at 45 seconds out. Entry ignition command is issued at T-minus 3 seconds. And if all 9 Merlin 1D engines are healthy and ignite, the command for the hold down clamps will be given at T0 liftoff. Coming up in 32 minutes, 17 seconds. Now T-minus 31 minutes, 33 seconds and counting. You can see a little bit of vapor forming there near the base of the Falcon 9 first stage. Currently T-minus 29 minutes, 45 seconds and counting. We're pausing to digest a new statement from NASA concerning the updates to their spacewalk schedule, confirming what we reported earlier in our broadcast that, in fact, the spacewalk that was supposed to happen today, EVA 90, is shuffling out to Monday, June 24th. It'll be followed by the next spacewalk on Tuesday, July 2nd. In its statement, NASA does not further clarify what it meant by the quote spacesuit discomfort issue, nor does it state whether that was specifically in relation to either Matt Dominic or Tracy Dyson. NASA also includes in a statement, quote, with consideration to NASA's Boeing crew flight test and the other spaceflight operations before going on to talk about the new dates for those spacewalks. However, while they had previously stated that the undock of the Starliner spacecraft was set for no earlier than June 18th, in this most recent statement, they do not actually mention when the undock and landing of Starliner is going to happen. So that may still be under evaluation right now, but they do not specify in this latest blog post update. Got some great imagery that I teased a little bit earlier on the broadcast as well. This image captured by Maxar back on June 7th. This view snapped from one of their on-orbit satellites, and a type of imagery that they describe as non-Earth imaging, or NEI. This particular image of the International Space Station was taken by their Worldview 3 satellite. And as you might be able to see from this image here, but we'll go ahead and show you the next one, zoom a little bit further in. Captures a moment in time for the commercial crew program that NASA had been waiting for quite some time. Both Boeing's Starliner spacecraft as well as SpaceX's Crew Dragon both docked to the space station, having brought NASA astronauts up to the orbiting outpost, the big city in the sky, as CFT Commander Butch Wilmore called it. As far as the timing for the Starlink 10-2 mission, the process happening here back on Earth. Within the last 5 minutes or so, SpaceX began loading cryogenic helium on board the pressure vessels on the Falcon 9 first stage. Helium was used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. That same process will happen on the second stage coming up in less than a minute. SpaceX is SpaceX is running its countdown for tonight's mission from the Hangar X site here at the Kennedy Space Center. Mentioned a little bit earlier in the broadcast, but if you were not here with us, SpaceX did get the environmental go-ahead to proceed with a 100-acre expansion near Hangar X. Their current campus, the Roberts Road site, is 67 acres now, and they've been doing a lot of work out there, some expansion within their previously approved 2018 environmental assessment. But with this 100-acre expansion approved from an environmental standpoint, they'll go ahead and move forward with a land use agreement with NASA that is currently being finalized. They could begin to start the work there to expand out their facilities here at KSC. Important part of supporting and increasing launch cadence, both for the Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets, but maybe in their minds, most importantly, as they begin to bring Starship online in an operational capacity, they'll need a lot more space to do that manufacturing work, and they're able to consolidate. The plan is to consolidate some of their facilities around Brevard County into a more centralized location. So that was the need for the expansion as laid out by SpaceX. fact, if you're one of our channel members right now, you can head over in a separate tab or after our live coverage wraps up with this mission. Got a full interview with Don Danker with the Kennedy Environmental Office to talk all about that environmental approval, as well as the current environmental assessment process that is in work being led by the Federal Aviation Administration for Starship flight operations over at Launch Complex 39A. Again, that full interview is up on the channel right now in our members only section. If you'd like to read more about it, though, we do have an article posted to the website, spaceflightnow.com, with a good chunk of the content of that interview. But if you'd like to see the interview in its entirety, it's right here on YouTube. One of the many reasons to consider being part of our channel member community. Your T minus 22 minutes, 28 seconds and counting. I do want to thank the more than 7,100 of you that are joining with us now this evening for our live launch commentary. If you haven't already, be sure to hit the like button. It allows more folks to find their way into this live coverage as we continue to step through the count. In now just about a minute and a half or less. See the so-called big vent from the strong back. Again, that happens as the feed lines are being chilled prior to second stage liquid oxygen load. Now, T minus 20 minutes, 6 seconds and counting. You see the so-called big vent now in swing. This will last until about T minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds, setting up for second stage LOX load. T minus 16 minutes on the dot. T minus 16 minutes, 12 seconds and counting. See, the big event is wrapped up, and we're just seconds away from the start of second stage liquid oxygen load. So far, things are progressing smoothly on this Falcon 9 mission now that fueling has gotten underway. Again, by SpaceX's own estimation, weather only 40% favorable for a liftoff opportunity tonight. They say all systems are looking good on the Falcon 9 rocket. So they will at least give it the old college try in 15 minutes and 15 seconds. Now at T minus 14 minutes, 21 seconds and counting. The particular first stage booster that is flying this mission tonight is going for its 16th flight. Tail number 1073 in the SpaceX fleet. Certainly not the oldest among SpaceX's flying first stage boosters, but far from the youngest as well. So let's go ahead and talk about the history it is racked up tonight before it goes ahead and flies for a 16th time. First launched back on May 14th, 2022 on its very first Starlink mission. That was Starlink 4-15, sending up 53 version 1.5 Starlink satellites to low Earth orbit. Next up was a C-band communication satellite for SES 20 or SES on June 29th. Satellite was SES 22. That was followed by a pair of Starlink missions on August 10th and not September 24th. It was Starlink 4-26 and Starlink 4-35. It was followed by this booster's first lunar-bound mission, the launch of the Hakuto R lunar lander that lifted off on December 11th. The launch went off as planned, but unfortunately, that lander crash landed on the moon. It was hoping to be the first commercial lander to successfully reach the lunar surface. That honor, of course, went to the Nova C lander from Intuitive Machines called Odysseus, or Odie. Intuitive Machines hoping to join it with its second lander called Athena that's launching in Q4 of this year. Next flight for this booster was the Amazonas Nexus mission on February 7th, 2023. It's a Spanish communications satellite for Hispasat that covers the Americas, Europe, and North Africa. Followed up by a mission to the International Space Station with the Commercial Resupply Services, or CRS-27 mission, which launched back on March 15th, the old Ides of March. Next up is a series of Starlink missions, Starlink 6-2 on April 19th, 5-11 on June 12th, 6-12 on September 4th, 6-27 on November 8th. Continuing on the Starlink chain, It's Starlink 6-37 on January 15th, 6-41 on March 4th. Then a rideshare mission, the first of its kind, Bandwagon 1. A little bit different than the transporter missions that are now launched from Vandenberg Space Force Base. And then most recently, we had Starlink 6-58 on May 13th. Been a busy few years since that booster debuted back in May of 2022. Speaking of the Falcon 9, let's go ahead and talk more specifically about the workhorse vehicle for SpaceX. Before we do, want to take a look at the live chat real quick and thank first off the nearly 13,000 of you who are watching with us live. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button. Lots more folks to find their way into our live coverage as we continue on now the final 10 minutes of the countdown tonight. Also want to thank Very Cherry for a very generous $20 super chat. Thank you so much, Very Cherry. Love the name and love the support. Very Cherry says, love the channel. Keep up the good work. Appreciate your support of what we do here at Spaceflight now. As mentioned, of course, the launch vehicle heading up tonight is SpaceX's Falcon 9, standing at 70 meters or 229 feet tall. Has diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. Majority of that is made up by the first stage, bottom 2/3 of the rocket. Again, this booster, tail number 1073, has flown 15 times before, and pausing to note that the mission tonight has been scrubbed. SpaceX is now targeting liftoff tomorrow, Friday, June 14th at 4:35 p.m. Eastern. That is the earliest opportunity for this Falcon 9 booster. SpaceX confirming that the weather was what scuttled the mission tonight in a statement just released. Again, the weather proving just too much for this Falcon 9 flight tonight. Unfortunate timing, but that is the way the cookie crumbles. Again, if you're just popping in with us here live, SpaceX is standing down from its launch attempt of the Starlink 10-2 mission tonight. The weather proving to be too much, according to the launch provider. And so they are targeting the beginning of their backup window. Again, that is Friday, June 14th. That window opening up at 4:35 p.m. Eastern. The opportunities that last until 8:19 p.m. In that backup opportunity, the weather looking better than it did tonight, although we may end up waiting again until near the end of the window. According to the 45th Weather Squadron, heading into today's launch opportunity, looking ahead to that 24-hour backup, they did forecast about 40% chance of favorable weather. At the start of the window, it improves to 80% favorable by the end of the window. We will likely see the 45th Weather Squadron issue a new launch weather forecast sometime tomorrow, So look for updated numbers, and we'll be sure to keep you posted on the outlook as we learn more. And you see a maybe disappointed, hopeful launch viewer in front of Pad 39A. This is a wildlife refuge after all, and certainly prone to having our scaly friends, the alligators, join us from time to time. Rest assured, our Adam Bernstein is safely far enough away from that particular gator. So don't worry about him. He's taking all the necessary precautions to keep himself safe, as he always does. Do you want to thank a few folks for your support tonight? Valerie Jones, marking 6 months of being a channel member with us, saying shout out to Hubby, who shares my love of this channel. Well, thank you, Valerie and Mr. Jones, for being with us as supporters of Spaceflight now. Our thanks as well to another one of our channel members. I am Lita with a $5 super chat. Thank you, Lita. Good to see you this evening. Saying hello, Will, team, and mods. Thanks as always for being there for us. Best coverage anywhere. And Randall LaPlante with a $2 super chat as well. Thank you so much for your support, Randall. Again, be sure to come back and join us for live launch coverage tomorrow night. The window opens up at 4:35, and our live coverage will begin an hour before liftoff. Taking one last look, a little bit of a tease of our tracking capability. This is coming from our friend Pete Carstens with Max Q Productions. We will have several camera eyes on the rocket as it begins to ascend from pad 40. Just one of the views that we'll be able to bring you tomorrow when the Starlink 10-2 mission is ready to lift off. And so with that, I want to thank our friends, of course, Pete Carsons and Chuck Briggs, for being with us this evening. And in preparation to track the rocket, they'll be back in action tomorrow as well with us for mission coverage. Thanks to our photographers, Adam Bernstein, Michael Kane as well. All they do for the channel here. Of course, our editor, Stephen Young, Spaceflight Now. Most importantly, want to thank you for watching wherever you're joining with us tonight, and we sincerely hope that you stop on by to kick off your weekend with the launch of a Falcon 9 rocket tomorrow. Again, be sure to check out Spaceflight Now's website, spaceflightnow.com, and the launch schedule for updates on the Starlink 10-2 mission. The window opens at 4:35, but we will post any updates as they come. With that, we're going to say goodnight, leave you with one last shot of Pad 39B, a lovely setting sun, as the sun is setting on our broadcast. So, for all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others. We will see you back here tomorrow for the live launch coverage of Starlink 10-2. Folks, we will see you then. Have a good night. Bye-bye.